Hello everybody, my name is Kendra. Welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a whole yarn review on the Knit Picks Chroma bulky yarn. This is a new to me yarn in that I decided I wanted to pick one of their lines to review that I hadn't tried yet. I picked several colors and then I have kind of been working with it and trying some different projects so I can share with you my thoughts. So to start with, the line is called Chroma Twist, which is in a bulky weight. They do carry the Chroma line in other thicknesses, and it appears as if the Chroma is a 3-ply made from the fingering weight yarn. The fiber content is 70% superwash wool and 30% nylon. Within one skein there is 127 yards and 100 grams. Now I have selected 8 colors to share with you, and I wanted to show the spectrum because there are some really bright fun colors, but there's also some more muted tones as well. The variation in the yarns is really interesting, especially the way the 3 plies work together, and most of the colors have a mirrored effect. From reading online, it looks like in the past they went as more of a gradient, but now they are mirrored, and I'll show you what that looks like once I show you some of the samples I've been knitting up. Now, one of the selling points that seemed really interesting to me is that it's often compared kind of like hand spun. Now, I think some of that's just the way that it is colored or dyed first and then spun together. It gives a more hand spun look, but because I really enjoy both spinning and also knitting with hand spun, I wanted to compare for myself how it really worked. One of the cool things about the Knit Picks website, and then I also did a search on Ravelry, is you can see people's comments and projects that they have used this yarn for. I will say it appears that it is primarily used for hats, just in searching what projects have been made. One of the biggest criticisms I read about with the yarn is that it has a lower quality compared to some of their other yarns, and by that people were finding knots and they were joined poorly, or that there was a lot of variation between the different dye lots or skeins of the same color. Now, I can't comment on the variation within the colors because I only ordered one of each, but I will say if you're kind of expecting more of a hand spun look, then that's somewhat to be expected, although I can understand that it's hard if it starts and stops at a different point and you do need multiple skeins for a project. It does make it more challenging. It may be more ideal for the one skein or where you don't want that perfect mirrored gradient. So when I was winding up my yarn, I had several of the skeins that had no apparent imperfections, no knots, no fluffs, whatever. It seemed to be fairly smooth and consistent. But then I came across a couple skeins that seemed to have multiple little knots as I was winding it up. And so it appears when I was kind of pulling it apart that within the 3 plies, one of the plies would have been tied together and have a little knot in place. And then it seemed like within that skein, all 3 plies would have had to have been joined. And so then there's multiple within the skein. So I can see how people would have an issue with that. And then other people not have a single problem. Now, there are other spots where they were joined and it was almost like that tight twist together, which I've seen in other skeins of yarn, but it started to get loose. I'm going to get into what I've knitted later, but on that point, I wanted to say that when each end of yarn is loose, it does start to come unplied. You can see it fluffing up here. This is just the beginning of the skein. I haven't done anything to it, and you can see it's becoming unspun and fluffy like that. So I think that is what happens when they join certain plies, that it does get fluffy, just the way it was joined. I want to point out one other area for when I was knitting where that happened. I left it in because I was going for, again, expecting it to act kind of like a hand spun, but you can see how it's a very sloppy join there between the different colors of the yarn. One other thing I noticed when I was winding the cakes from the skeins is that they were not very securely tied within the skein. Each one only had one tie and it was just with the ends pretty much, and so it was really easy for it to become tangled, and I had to be really careful with it, especially because my Swift is kind of broken and it doesn't hold the shape properly. So I had some issues with tangling because it wasn't tied within the skein. The yarn label calls to use a US size 10 to 11 or a 6 to 8 millimeter needle, and also calls it a bulky weight, as I said. However, most of the Ravelry users indicated that it was more of a heavy worsted or Aran weight. When I was knitting it up, I did find I liked the fabric a lot better with more of like a size 8 needle rather than a 10 or an 11. And while it could be knitted at a looser gauge, I did prefer it at the smaller needle size. I'm going to get into all the colors that I have, but I will point out that each of the color sections are quite long, which I do think would be really good for crochet. So to start with, I have 4 colors here that have just been knitted into a swatch. Now for the other colors, I did knit a whole project so you could see the full ball and how the color variation was, but I thought it might be interesting to see them compared. So this top color is called Surfs Up. You can tell that within the variation here, there is more of the tealy blue as well as a more aqua sort of blue. And then if you look within the cakes, and I'm going to be honest, my cakes are pretty messy. My ball winder is not as happy with bulky yarn, but it is more saturated colors getting into lighter colors as you move along in the skein. This one here does not seem to have a lot of variation. Compared to some of the other balls that shift between like entire colors, this one seems a lot less variegated, but it's just a nice subtle one. This is one of the colors I would really like to use kind of for myself because I really like this color family and could see it useful in a lot of things. I am also going to go over some project ideas at the end here. This next swatch here is called Weather Vane. It's another muted blue. It's almost like that blue has that drop of gray in it. This is another one within the cake. There's not a ton of variation. The whole thing will have that sort of marbled look to it, but the shift does not happen quite as much. It does get deeper right at the very end there, but this is what this color looks like here. This next color here is called Hollyhock. You can see it's nice light flecks of color, and it goes from straight the deepest royal blue and then it gets brighter here. And it looks like within the cake as it gets going it turns to more of a gray tone with some purple. I'll try to show you this side here. You can see the purple and blue right at the end there. So this one will have a really nice variation within the whole skein, I think. Again, apologies on the messy cake here. The last one I have in swatch form, I believe is called Lakefront, but I hope I didn't get those tags mixed up. But it's yellows and greens, and then if you look in the cake here, it moves to a nice navy blue, much deeper color. So this one has quite a strong color shift as well. Now getting into the projects that I made, first up, I thought this would make a perfect hat. And so I decided to make this little pixie hood here, and I started off with the chroma at the bottom, and at the top here I wanted to try something different. So I ended up ordering a single skein of chroma in the fingering weights. I divided it into 3 balls and I spun them together to make this one here, which is the pixie color. This here is the rest of the cake that I have that I spun myself. Now I don't know, I'm sure I didn't split it the same way that Knit Picks does in their mill or whatever when they're making it, but you can see I still have a lot of color shift. It started right at this line here with the periwinkle moving to pink, greens. This one has a lot of color in it. But it really makes a similar yarn just by doing that three ply. The consistency of the yarn itself is basically exactly the same as the one that is already spun, the bulky weight, but I thought it'd be fun to try it for myself, and I think it worked really well. But here is a combination of the two. So if you pay attention that this is where the color shifts, I'll hold it up here and you can see the way that the color is mirrored from end to end, and how depending on what skein you get, you might get a different section of that mirror. I also wanted to knit that hood because I had just knit it in a hand spun. Now a while ago in one of my Vlogmas episodes I showed dyeing my rainbow wool, and this is the yarn I ended up with, and I used it to make the same pixie hat for my youngest, and my older daughter wanted one for herself. This is 100% merino, and it is notably softer. I would say it just has a smoother feel to it than the chroma, but it is quite similar. They're both very like plump feeling and warm, and just I feel like I just want to keep squishing them because they are very nice to feel. Anyways, I thought it'd be fun to compare, and I can definitely again see the comparison to the hand spun. It doesn't have variation, like not the thick and thin spots except for where it's coming unplied basically, but it does have the color shifting like you would see in a hand spun. So this is one of the other colors, Leaf I believe it's called, and I made a neck warmer with it. Another, I think, good use of this yarn. It is so squishy, it's going to be really warm, I can just tell already. And you can see, again, the mirrored effect with the lighter in the middle. Now Now the last project that I knit was a flax sweater. If you've been here before, I've knit quite a few of these, and I used 2 colors of the Chroma for this. It's definitely a dense sweater. I did go down a needle size just to get gauge because it is a worsted weight pattern, but it's not crazy. It will be warm, but it's not just so stiff and tight. Tighter than a worsted weight, but again, still a nice fabric overall. You can see those color shifts. I did have to break it to do the sleeves, and then I used the lighter one on the cuffs and the very bind off there. I think it's a really fun way to use a yarn that's not your typical variegated yarn, but without definitely the cost of hand spun. Now one thought I had was that it may be a good fit for some of the spin cycle patterns, especially the ones that Andrea Mowry was putting out a while ago. She had a whole series of shift patterns where she used a spin cycle yarn, which is quite a pricey yarn to start with, but it has that same sort of color shifting effect. I really do think that for some of the patterns that call for a heavier weight yarn, that it could work really well because it has that same sort of color shift as a spin cycle or as other hand spun does. I think this yarn would be perfect for hats. One pattern I found in particular was by Espace Tricot. It's a free one with a bulky weight yarn, but I thought that would be a perfect pattern for this. I think it would be the right amount of warmth in that it's soft, it's squishy, but it also, again, it's thicker. It's not just a fingering weight hat. It would actually keep you warm. It also would be a great choice for some cowls, and paired with either a solid color or another color in the Chroma twist line. I think it would be a nice pairing. I personally would probably go with contrasting colors rather than trying to mix the gradients and make it look seamless. That would be something I would choose, but you can really do whatever you want with it. Since it is superwash, I think it makes a really nice choice for baby things, especially like that sweater I knit up. It's so quick because it's bulky. It's a really nice feel. It's not as soft as like a straight merino, but I think it'll wear a little bit better because of that. It doesn't just have that super squish, but it is nice and soft, definitely next to skin, I think, for anybody. And being superwash, definitely washable as well. Another complaint or criticism I saw online was people were saying that fluff was coming off while they were knitting with this yarn. I do want to say I did not have that issue at all, except for, like I said, on the ends where it was coming out and applied, it was looking fluffy, but I didn't have actual like pieces of fluff coming off. So I did just want to address that because if you're anything like me, I like to research the things that I buy before I buy them. And so looking at yarns, I want to see what other people are saying about it, what they're making with it. And that was a concern that came up. And in knitting these few projects and kicking up the other ones, it's not something that I noticed. Overall, I think that Chroma Bulky Twist is a really interesting yarn. I really love the colors. To me, that's always what draws me into a yarn, is what the color looks like. To me, it can make or break a yarn or a project, and having that variation is really neat. I think it makes a good substitute for hand spun if you don't spin yourself, or if you like the look but want it at a more budget-friendly price. It's also a nice fiber blend. It feels really nice to knit with, that if you have projects that are like a heavy worsted Aran weight, it would be a great option for that. I do think it lends itself probably better to single skein, or where it can be used with contrasting yarns rather than buying multiples of the same. But at the same time, it could be paired in a lot of different ways for a really fun effect. There's not a ton of different colors available, but there is a wide range from more muted tones like that neck warmer to brighter ones as well. Overall, I've been really happy with pretty much all the Knit Picks yarn I've used, and the Chroma Bulky Twist really is no exception. Overall, I think that if these sorts of things appeal to you, it may be a good option. I would just say keep in mind when it goes time to skein them to be careful not to get them all tangled up. I really enjoyed knitting with it. If you have any questions about this yarn, please leave them down below. I don't work for them or anything else. I just wanted to try it out and let you all know what I thought of it. If you've knit with this yarn, let me know if any of these criticisms that I have read online have been true for you, and otherwise I will see you in the next video. Bye!